This is something Anik and I have been thinking about a lot lately, particularly in the wake of Black Lives Matter and the current protests and demonstrations and all the various ways that people are getting involved in that movement, and particularly the way that businesses are getting involved in that movement. Anik and I have been thinking a lot about the role that business owners have in the community and also what it means to have values as a business. So I've titled this presentation Values in Community. And we're going to talk a little bit about the ways that businesses have and demonstrate their values and what opportunities those stances that businesses inherently take provide. Because even, a non-decision is still a decision. So ultimately, it's hard to avoid the fact of having a value as a business. So the question is, what is it about your business that demonstrates your values, and how can you control that to align with your personal values, as well as to better your business in the long term? And let's jump in. So, how does a business have values? We narrowed it down into 5 basic categories. A business demonstrates and has values because those are kind of the same thing by what it does, how it does it, who it works with, what it chooses to participate in, and what it says. So what it does. Here we've got Amazon, we have Walmart. Those are 2 businesses that mostly do the same thing. They're convenient, they're cheap, they're accessible. What Amazon and Walmart do is they provide a large amount of goods to a large amount of consumers. And we can say then, as people looking outwards, that those are some values of those companies, that they value being able to bring a variety of goods to a variety of people at an affordable cost without much hassle. I have Tesla here. Tesla is focused on making electronic vehicles. In doing so, Tesla is helping to remove humanity's dependence on fossil fuels. Whether or not that's, Elon Musk's stated goal or any of the employees' stated goal, the very fact that what they're doing advances the quest to find non-fossil fuel dependent energy is, we can say that a value of Tesla is diversifying from fossil fuels. I have the National Restaurant Association here. Now, I brought this up as a placeholder for restaurants. Every restaurant's going to be different, but they kind of boil down to the same factors of what their values are. I'm going to turn the light on because I just realized it's cloudy outside. So a restaurant can offer very high-end, very gourmet, very luxury offerings to a very small table crowd and be like, that's what we're going to do. We're going to pride ourselves on our quality, our service, our atmosphere. And I'm not going to say that the restaurants that aren't in that gourmet aren't doing that, but that's their target, which we'll get into a little bit later. But the restaurants make this choice about quality, about service, about atmosphere and experience that demonstrates their values of what they want to bring to their consumers. And that kind of carries all the way down the chain of how they treat their employees, where they source their materials. And we're going to get into a little bit of that later. And lastly, I have Patagonia here, which is a very interesting and I think ultimately pretty special example of a business and how a business can have values and what it does with those values, and ultimately how it can stand up for those values. And we're definitely going to talk about them throughout the course of this. So I'll get back to them later as well. The next step is how a business does it. So every business pretty much operates on three things. They operate on a workforce, they operate on materials for that workforce, and they operate upon equipment for that workforce. And so the treatment of employees is a way a business can demonstrate their values. Because if you treat your employees well, then when you come out and say, we stand up for human rights, no one can point at you and say, you say that, but you treat your employees poorly. The sourcing of materials. If you say, we believe in environmental causes, but you get your materials from mines that used to exist or that existed in what used to be an Amazon rainforest, then people will point at you and say, well, hold on, you're buying stuff that is leading to deforestation of natural resources. And then the third being equipment and the ramifications of equipment. There's two kind of main ramifications, negative ramifications of equipment. They're pollution and their safety. So if your business is, using equipment and you come out and say you're environmentally friendly and they're like, well, hold on, you're dumping all this toxic sludge into rivers, that's going to be held against you and negate kind of the value statements you're making. So to jump back to these five pillars of businesses demonstrating values, a recurring theme that we're going to touch upon is that ultimately talk is cheap, and that what it does, what you do as a business owner and what your business does and how you do it and how your business does it are going to carry far more weight than what you say as a business owner. And it goes all the way down the list, that the top is the most important, what it does is the most, what you do as a business owner is the most important, how you do it being the next important. Then we're going to get into who you work with as a business owner. And then we're going to get into who you choose to participate in. And finally, we're going to get into what you say. And that's where the talk is cheap bit really comes into play. But if you're not integrating these and observing these policies as a business owner from this very base level of what you do and then how you do it, you're going to hold yourself up to being inconsistent with when you later talk about what you stand for and what you believe in and who you support. So ultimately, as a business, your primary responsibility when you're looking to craft an image of what you support and what you believe in and what your values are, it will always start with what you do and how you do it. Then we get into who you work with. And this is going to be both who you employ and also who are your customers, who is your target market. So for Anik and I at Anik's Books, we really believe, and this is a conversation we've had since the very first time we met, that we really believe in the small business owners of South Lake Tahoe. So it's always been very, very, very important for us to mold our business around that and do our very best to work for that community and those people. And so our target market is in line with a value that both Anik and I have. And we're able to then use our personal beliefs to align the values and beliefs of our business. One sort of example of this, and it's going to get right into the next point, is like a sliding scale for a dentist or a chiropractor. Those are people who believe that their services are essential and necessary, but understand that not necessarily everyone can afford them. So if you're in one of those businesses and employing a sliding scale, you understand that what you do is important and you're doing your best to make sure it's available to as many people as possible. And that's a way that your business can demonstrate your value. Who it employs. This is a very big subject. But ultimately, who you choose to employ, how they behave themselves is going to reflect upon you as a business owner. If you employ someone and they turn out to be a bad actor, someone who's done bad things or inappropriate conduct, it will reflect on you as a business owner for why you employed them, why you continued to engage them, why didn't you see what was going on with these people. But conversely, when you employ good actors and you treat them right, you will be rewarded by community support. They will support you in their own social circles. And as a business owner, you will see the fact that you hiring these people and treating them right is then reflecting positively upon you as a business. I have community donations here. This is a very important thing, particularly in a small town like South Lake Tahoe. A number of our small businesses continually participate in and donate their time, effort, and money to various community efforts. Some examples are local sporting teams fundraisers, our fundraisers for other nonprofits, participating in nonprofits and community goods that benefit our unique environment here in Lake Tahoe, whether it's outdoor activities or the environment. So in choosing to do that, you're making a statement stronger than just saying, I support you, or I believe in the environment. You know, it's an act of putting your money where your mouth is. You're putting your time, your business, your employees, which ultimately as a business owner costs you money, in support of these things. And then we have blacklisting. Blacklisting is a very strong way for a business to stand up for its values, particularly if that business has employees. The strongest example is, you know, a restaurant where there's a patron that is mistreating their employees, and the restaurant, rather than seeking further money from the patron, just says, you're no longer welcome here. You're mistreating our employees. We don't stand by that. We believe in our employees. That's a value statement for a business. But there's other examples too. And the best example, and Anik pointed this one out to me, that we could think of is Patagonia. So Patagonia is a sporting mountain gear, hardware and software company, in that they do both hardware for mountain climbing, but also like apparel works. And Patagonia has lots and lots and lots of opportunities to do co-branding ventures with other major companies who want to buy Patagonia gear and stick their brand on it. And Patagonia has decided that they will not work with these companies if these companies are misaligned with their values of environmentalism. And so that's Patagonia saying right there that we are going to just ignore a large portion of our customer base because we disagree, well, to bring it back, with how they do things and what they do. And so there's Patagonia. Who it's working with is supporting those two prior ideas of what we do and how we do it as business owners. What it participates in. So I have Nike listed here. There's both the good and the bad of Nike. The good that we're seeing right now is Nike a few years ago gave Colin Kaepernick a major endorsement deal while he was being allegedly, potentially, I believe the court case was settled, so we don't know whether or not what the outcome was, but allegedly blackballed by the NFL for voicing his political beliefs. And Nike gave him a major endorsement deal and a platform for which he could continue to voice those beliefs. At the time, it was very controversial. It was very risky. It may have been beneficial for them in the short term, but now in the current climate, they are coming out looking very, very good because they were on the right side of history in that case. Now, I also have the bad, is that how Nike does things is typically and at history very, very controversial. Um, they have a long history of abuse and exploitation in Southeast Asia labor markets, which they have often had to confront and face against. And even in the wake of the Colin Kaepernick endorsements, that was a criticism I was seeing levied against both Nike and Colin Kaepernick. And so that goes in with political donations as a whole. So as a business, lots and making political donations and making political stances is putting you out there, and you're trusting that your values match up enough with the values of the community that the backlash you face for supporting them is less than the goodwill you receive. And that's where this gets really risky. We can look at Chick-fil-A, who has a history of donating to anti-LGBTQ organizations. And I can sit here and say that's bad because I disagree with them. But I can also sit here and say that's good because it's the owner doing something he believes in. And now, typically when you're fighting against a civil rights movement, you'll find yourself on the wrong side of history. But again, I don't want to make a statement about my moral judgments versus theirs. I just want to talk about the fact that Chick-fil-A and their owner is taking a stance, and it is costing them. And that is a risk that is involved when you make this outward political participation as a business. And lastly, we have what it says. I had a bunch of examples here. I'll talk about Ben and Jerry's. Ben and Jerry's made a great statement, and again, that's my own valuation. But what Ben and Jerry's did was they took a hard stance, a committed stance. They did not hesitate nor mince words. Ben and Jerry's minces garlic and cookies for their ice cream, but never their words, it would seem. And they made a very strong, very definitive statement about Black Lives Matters. And that's all well and good. We can look at that statement and say, wow, what a great statement. But if they don't have the history along every other step of this, then that statement doesn't mean anything. If we look at that statement and it comes out that, well, it turns out that they're funding all sorts of movements that are counter to Black Lives Matter, that they have racist hiring practices, then we could be like, well, really, Ben and Jerry's, like, you say that, but we know better. So ultimately what it says is, yes, a way a business can demonstrate its values, but again, talk is cheap. And when your talk does not line up with your actions, it harms your integrity. And that integrity is why all of this values matters for a business owner and a business in these communities. Because your values can build your brand by building integrity. So let's talk about Patagonia again. Patagonia, they at one point were a rock climbing hardware company first and foremost. And they learned that the specific tools they were making were actually harming the environment. And this was very, very early on in the company. And they were informed of that, and they immediately pivoted, developed new technology, new hardware, and supported it fully by funding lessons and essays on how to use the new equipment in their magazines and newsletters. And so that was kind of the start of Patagonia becoming an environmentally conscious company, doing something wrong and making changes. And now they've continued that all the way through, and we can go with that with our blacklisting example, where Patagonia now refuses to work with other companies that do not align with their beliefs about the environment. And they are, functionally putting their money where their mouth is. And this is all because endorsements and statements are public declarations of values. But values must be demonstrated from the bottom up. If you make an endorsement or a statement and you don't have the company history and the company policy and the company boy, I can't find the word I'm looking for. Atmosphere, the company atmosphere of supporting that value, then you'll be criticized when it comes out. No one will really believe what you say. And so here we have Ben and Jerry's. They made that provocative, very strong statement. They have a global head of activism. They employ someone to be in charge of their brand and how their brand presents itself as being an activist, forward-thinking company. Chick-fil-A, we talked about them a little earlier about how, yes, it's great they stood up for their values. But when they were confronted and people told them that their values were bad and they weren't going to be supported because of those values, Chick-fil-A promised to stop donating to these anti-LGBTQ foundations. And just very recently, it's come out that they've actually broken that promise. And so that is going to hurt Chick-fil-A's integrity. And then we have Nike with their history of worker exploitation. They can give Colin Kaepernick a bunch of money and a giant platform to say that Black Americans are exploited and mistreated in the history of this nation. But Nike has a history of exploiting and mistreating poor colored people around the world to make cheap footwear. And so all those criticisms can be thrown back at you if you're not focusing on these values from that bottom lowest level all the way to the top. And what does this all mean in South Lake Tahoe? Well, first, I have a chart here. This is our sales tax revenue in South Lake Tahoe by month. And it's broken down in comparing it to the average monthly sales tax revenue. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because we can kind of see that there's not too much deviation from this 100% line. And the deviation that we do see is mostly around March and December. And our traditional kind of shoulder season in South Lake Tahoe doesn't line up with the data we're seeing here. And the reason that that is because the local market in South Lake Tahoe is actually bigger, I think, than we've been historically taught to think of it. So tourism is not the driver of the economy that we have always thought it was. That the local participants in our economy are just as important and perhaps more valuable to reach out to and secure than tourists. And most importantly is those locals are the ones where your values will become important and reliable, and that integrity towards your values will build a consumer loyalty towards your brand that you will not be able to achieve with tourists, or you won't be able to achieve if you don't have that values-based integrity. Consumers prefer local businesses. I think that's kind of an obvious and goes mostly without saying, certainly among locals, but I think even among our tourist crowd in Tahoe, that given the opportunities, typically the local businesses will be favored. But again, this all gets back into the idea that without that strong values-based integrity, that's where the trust comes from. That's where the locals invest in your community, in your business, because they're not just investing in your business, they're investing in your community. And that's because, or that's part of why how you treat your employees matter. Up here in a small town, it's very interconnected, very interwoven, that your employee is very much likely a friend of a customer of yours. And if you don't have this commitment to your employees and your commitment to your values going all the way down, that will be reflected poorly upon you by the people you employ. I was going to talk a little bit about my experience at the Cork and More here. When I first moved back into town, I started working at the Cork and More, which at the time was under new ownership. And it was just kind of supposed to be a temporary job for me to stop burning through my savings when I moved back. But because of the way the new owners treated me and the other employees, it ended up being one of the best jobs I've ever had. It ended up being so much fun. I left work every day having laughed a whole heck of a lot. And that really reflected not only in the way that I told my peer group and my social circle about the Cork and More and encouraged them to support it and say, no, these are good people who treat their people right, but also in the way that we as employees treated all of our customers and how that entire attitude permeated from the very foundations of the business all the way to the very top. And that benefit that the Cork and More saw because of that goodwill and that back and forth between their employees, and not just because they treated us well, but because they had integrity and they believed in things and they stood up for us. And when we told them something was wrong, they made decisions about it and stuck by their values and their decisions. And all of that is the trust building and the integrity that developing your values from that foundational level of what you do and how you do it will come back to really reap many, many rewards for you. So yeah, so we have the what we do and how we do it. And if you can't back up a value with what you do and how you do it, then you open yourselves up to all sorts of accusations of lacking integrity at the most fundamental level. So every time you try to make a statement and a value as a business owner, it will always boil down to kind of what you do, how you do it, but also to a lesser extent, who you work with, who you choose to participate with, and what you choose to participate in, and what it says. So with that, we can open this up to some Q&A. I see I have one in the chat right now, which is, what if one of your employees states their opinion on Facebook? What if it's a good stance to take and one you personally agree with, but not necessarily one you want your company to participate in as an overall conversation? How do you separate your business from your employees and their online presence? I think that's a really great statement or question right there, and it's a very complicated question. I think one of the most important things that we can look at with that is that ultimately falls in our fifth category of your business values of what it says. So you have an employee right now saying something, and it's even something that you as a business owner agree with, but your business isn't saying anything along those lines. Either in support of it or deny or against it. And what that means for you is as a business, you can come out and make a statement one way or the other. But ultimately, it will boil down to your own business practices and the earlier, more fundamental principles. Because again, talk is cheap. It's easy for me to go online and make a statement about, I don't know, in the current statement, defund the police. But if I can't back that up with reasons and evidence of why I believe that's the case, if I can't back that up with actions on my own part about what I've done to what else I've done to kind of help against the over-militarized police state of Black America, then my statement doesn't really mean all that much other than just a statement of solidarity. So how do you separate your business from your employees and their online presence? I don't think there's a way that you can, ultimately. Would it be appropriate for a company to stifle that employee's online presence, to ask them to get involved because they work for me? Well, ultimately, that's a values statement right there, right? Doing so, that's how you treat your employees. That is a stronger value statement, probably, than just letting them have an online presence. Now, there's a very fine line, I think, to be drawn here between harassment, unsafe and violent practices, and passively condoning and supporting those as an employer, I would say are a hard no. Is anything like that, anything that borders on some sort of violence, whether it's physical or emotional violence, is something as an employer you should be very, very concerned about and come down on your employee and tell them that it's unacceptable, because that will reflect very poorly on you as a business owner. Outside of those cases of explicit violence, be it physical or emotional, I think it's harder to say. Like the questioner asks, it feels sticky that you could maybe as a business make a statement on your own that comes out in some sort of neutral position. But again, if you believe more in support of that and you just don't want to take a stance, then that doesn't serve you too good. Ultimately, I think you'd be best served by going with what you believe in and the values that you really hold and that your business really demonstrates, because that integrity is going to reflect best upon you over the long run. And I think that is the best way to handle this, and it's a very tricky situation. So the tools that I'm trying to demonstrate here are how your business is already making these value statements, how you can examine them as a business owner, how you can change those value statements, and then once you've crafted all your business's value statements kind of in a line with your personal values, how then can you leverage that in the public good? And really dialing that down into that point where it's what you believe in and your business practices support that and support those end goals, you will get this trust and integrity from the community that is really otherwise impossible to get, because it only comes from consistency from holding these values and sticking to them. Do we have any other questions?
So you talked a little about how Chick-fil-A, it was not to their advantage to break their promise. There's a lot of talk about, bakeries who won't sell cakes to same-sex, that have the same-sex marriage at the top of the cake and things like that. And I guess the point I want to bring is, and you brought it up, but sometimes even those stance that, are probably not going to be on the right side of history, if you're in the right kind of community, some of those bakers have actually profited from it, and some of them did not read the room and ended up realizing, ooh, I should have kept my mouth shut. A lot of what's going to determine if it's a good value to speak up for is really a question of reading the room and keeping in mind what your target market is and how speaking up is going to affect how your target market views you. And I'm not condoning hypocrisy here, but risk management, I guess.
Again, I can't tell you what values are good to hold as a business owner and what are bad, other than like a few broad strokes, like treating your employees well. That'll generally be pretty well received. People will look poorly on you if you treat your employees poorly. Pollution, again, generally, if you pollute, people will be angry with you. And if you don't pollute, people will be pretty happy with you. But beyond a couple obvious examples and clear-cut examples, it's very tough to say when is it worth taking a moral stand in your business and when is it not. And so I think the best guidance that I can give right now is to not which ones to choose, but to just recognize which ones you are already making as a business owner and how to recognize the values that you're already demonstrating and the values that you already put out into the world. And if those are truly values that you want to demonstrate and put out into the world, or if they're not, and then how and where to look to make changes in your business so that way they better reflect what you want to put out into the world. I know that doesn't really answer your question, but I think that's the best I can do.
No, I loved it. That's perfect.
Do you have to make a statement? Again, a statement is a strong way of projecting your values, but it's ultimately one of the weakest. It's very useful, a lot of ways to add your voice to a conversation and to amplify the voices of those who can't speak up. But if you instead choose to stay out of controversial things as a business owner, just recognize that that is also a value statement. That inaction is also a value statement just as much as action is. And so, again, the best I can advise you, because I don't want to impose my own moral and my own value judgments on anyone listening in here, is where your company is making those value statements, what value statements your company is already making, and how can you modify them to better align with what you as a business owner want your business to put forth into the world. It certainly doesn't make it a weak business to not want to make a statement. No, but just be warned that not making a statement is as much of a statement as making a statement in, I won't say every circumstance, but in lots of circumstances. The Black Lives Matters is obviously one that's going on in the zeitgeist of this entire conversation, and it's what spurred Anik and I to do this in the very first place. But that is kind of an obvious one where not making a statement isn't going to really condemn business, and making a statement will score business lots of points. But there are examples of, I want to say like in the Me Too movement, where businesses stood by and didn't say anything and didn't do anything, and then have been held accountable for their lack of integrity in the public sphere because these sexual misproprieties, misogyny, and sexist practices were going on under their watch. And by not making a statement, they were tacitly condoning it. And that was something these businesses have been taken to task for and has been held against them. So it's ultimately a matter of, it will always be up to the business owner. And the best I can sort of do is equip them to best make these decisions. Were there any other
And
questions?
then, like you said too, there's not just making a statement. Like, so if you don't make a statement about things, but you contribute to things like the Boys and Girls Club, who are helping. I mean, the Boys and Girls Club benefit the whole community, but they specifically benefit some of the poorer segments of the community who happen to be people of color and the few Black people we actually have in this town. You know, that's another way to make a statement about BNL without actually using words.
Yeah. And so if you're taking measures and steps higher up this hierarchy, then if someone ever comes to you and accuses you of making a statement and says, well, that's as good as a non-statement, you can, well, be like, well, actually, you know, I've done things that are more important than just like posting on social media under my company's brand. That's why that step was the very last one we talked about. It would be the very top of the pyramid had I drawn a pyramid graphic. Talk is cheap. It will ultimately boil down to your actions. It's going to be what you do, how you do it, who you work with, and who you associate with. That will be held far more importantly than anything that you say. And who you associate with can be who you donate to or who you support with charitable contributions. Maybe they're not, you know, monetary donations, but maybe they're donations of time, efforts, and products of your business.
Thank you, Seth.
All right, well, if there's no other questions, I just want to say thank you to everyone. Hope you all have a great afternoon and enjoy some of the sunshine that we've got out there right now. And we'll see you next time. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.